Prologue. Detroit, Michigan, 1965. Jack "Scrapper" Henson stood in the Chrysler engineering bay, watching a young engineer struggle with a chassis modification. The kid couldn't have been more than 25, was trying to reinforce the suspension mounting with a complex welding pattern. "Stop," Henson said. The young engineer looked up, startled. "Mr. Henson, the blueprint says—" "The blueprint's wrong." Henson walked over, picked up a piece of scrap metal from the discard pile, and held it against the chassis. "See this? Weld this here, straight across. 45 degrees. 3 minutes of work instead of 30. "But that's not what the design team—" "The design team doesn't know what works until someone makes it work. I learned that in France, 1944. Had a Sherman tank with a busted suspension. No blueprint, no spare parts. Just German scrap metal and a welding torch. Fixed it in an hour. That tank carried me from Normandy to Berlin." The young engineer stared. "You were a tanker?" "Tank commander, 3rd Armored Division." Henson set down the scrap metal. "Let me tell you something about engineering. The best innovations don't come from drawing boards. They come from mechanics who don't have time to die." Part 1, July 15, 1944, Normandy hedgerows. Sergeant Jack Henson sat in the commander's cupola of his M4A1 Sherman, watching bocage country roll past. The Norman hedgerows, ancient earthen walls topped with dense vegetation, turned every field into a natural fortress, perfect for defense, hell for attackers. His crew, driver Private Eddie Morrison from Pittsburgh, gunner Corporal Sam Chen from San Francisco, loader Private First Class Danny Wright from Alabama, and assistant driver bow gunner Private Tommy Sullivan from Boston. Average age, 23. Combat experience, 6 weeks. They'd landed at Omaha Beach on D+8, June 14th. Since then, they'd fought through 20 miles of hedgerows, losing 2 Shermans from their original platoon. The math was brutal. German defenders could hear American tanks approaching through the thick vegetation. They'd wait with Panzerfaust rocket launchers until the Sherman pushed through the hedgerow, then hit it from the side at point-blank range. "Contact right," Chen called out. Henson spotted the German anti-tank team, 2 soldiers with a Panzerschreck, positioned in a sunken road 200 meters away. Standard ambush. "Chen, traverse right, high explosive." "Can't see them clearly. The loader's blocking my sight picture." Henson cursed. The Sherman's internal layout meant the loader stood directly between the gunner and the target during certain traverse angles. Chen had to wait for Wright to shift position before he could acquire the target properly. By the time Wright moved and Chen sighted, the German team had fired. The rocket screamed past, missing by 2 meters. Pure luck. Chen returned fire. The high explosive round detonated in the road, and the German team disappeared in smoke and debris. "Good shooting," Henson said, but his mind was working. The delay, those 3 seconds where Wright blocked Chen's line of sight, could have killed them. Would have killed them against a more accurate enemy. That night, at the maintenance area, Henson approached the battalion's recovery team. They were working on a knocked-out Sherman, salvaging parts. "You got any mirrors?" Henson asked. The recovery sergeant, a grizzled man named Kowalski, looked at him oddly. "Mirrors? Small ones, like from a truck or something." "I got a side mirror off a captured German Opel. Why?" "Can I have it?" Kowalski handed over the mirror, about 4 inches wide, surprisingly intact. "What are you going to do with it?" "Win the war," Henson said. Back at his Sherman, Henson studied the turret interior. The problem was clear. Wright, loading ammunition, stood between Chen and the forward view during certain angles. If Wright could see what Chen was looking at, he could anticipate which type of round was needed. Armor-piercing for tanks, high explosive for infantry, white phosphorus for smoke. Henson welded the mirror to the turret wall at Wright's eye level, angled to reflect the forward viewport. "Try it," he told Wright the next morning. Wright peered into the mirror. "I can see straight ahead, same as the gunner." "Exactly. Now when Chen calls armor piercing, you've already got your hand on it because you saw the Panzer same time he did." They tested it during the next engagement, a skirmish with 2 Panzer IVs near St. Lo. Chen spotted the first Panzer and called armor piercing before he'd even finished traversing. Wright, watching through the mirror, had already grabbed the AP round and was loading as Chen spoke. Fire time reduced from 7 seconds to 4 seconds. They killed the first Panzer before it could fire. The second managed 1 shot, which missed, before Chen destroyed it. "Scrapper, that mirror just saved our asses," Chen said after the battle. The nickname stuck, Henson the Scrapper, who improvised solutions from scrap. Part 2, August 20th, 1944, the Falaise Pocket. The German 7th Army was trapped in a pocket near Falaise, and Allied forces were compressing the perimeter. Henson's Sherman was part of the hammer closing the trap. But the Germans weren't surrendering quietly. Desperate soldiers with Panzerfaust launchers stalked Allied tanks through the chaos. During one engagement, a rocket hit the Sherman to Henson's left. The shaped charge penetrated the side armor, and the tank brewed up, crew slang for catastrophic ammunition fire. 3 men escaped. 2 didn't. Henson watched the Sherman burn and thought about shaped charges. The Panzerfaust worked by focusing explosive force into a jet of superheated metal that punched through armor. But the penetration depth decreased significantly if the warhead detonated away from the armor. The jet dispersed in air. The solution was simple in theory. Put something between the Panzerfaust and the tank's actual armor. If the warhead detonated on the external layer, the penetrator jet would dissipate before reaching the real protection. "Spaced armor," he muttered. "What's that, Sarge?" Morrison asked. "German tanks have it. We're gonna steal it." After the Falaise Pocket closed on August 22nd, thousands of destroyed German vehicles littered the battlefield. Henson and his crew scavenged everything they could find: track links from Panthers, steel plates from destroyed Panzer IVs, structural beams from blown-up trucks. They welded it all to the Sherman sides, track links in overlapping patterns, plates at angles, beams creating standoff distance. It looked ridiculous, a patchwork of German and American steel. Captain Walsh, their company commander, was appalled. "Sergeant, you can't just weld random scrap to a tank. The suspension can't handle the extra weight." "With respect, sir, the suspension handles it better than the crew handles Panzerfaust rounds. This is unauthorized modification of Army property." "Yes, sir. Permission to keep being unauthorized until we reach Berlin, sir?" Walsh stared at him, then at the Sherman. "If that thing breaks down because you overloaded it, you're walking to Germany, understood?" "Understood, sir." 3 days later, during a firefight near Chambois, a Panzerfaust hit Henson's Sherman directly on the side. The warhead detonated against a welded track link 6 inches away from the hull. Inside the tank, the impact sounded like someone hitting a massive bell with a hammer. The crew was temporarily deafened, but when the smoke cleared, the hull armor was intact. The improvised spacing had worked. The shaped charge penetrator dissipated before reaching the real armor. "Everyone okay?" Henson shouted, ears ringing. "I think I pissed myself," Sullivan admitted, "but I'm alive, so I'll take it." Word spread fast. Within 2 weeks, half the Shermans in 3rd Armored Division were covered in welded German scrap. Army maintenance officers complained about weight distribution and suspension stress. Tankers ignored them. Survival trumped regulations. By September 1944, the modification was so widespread that Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force officially studied it. Engineers determined the added weight was acceptable and the protection was genuine. What started as Scrapper Henson's field improvisation became semi-official doctrine. Part 3rd, September 12, 1944, Hurtgen Forest. The Hurtgen Forest was hell made of trees and mud. Dense vegetation limited visibility to 50 meters. Roads became killing zones where German anti-tank guns waited in ambush. Henson's platoon, now 3 Shermans after losses, encountered a Panther at 75 meters during a patrol. At that range, the Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate Sherman armor from any angle. Sherman's 76mm guns could only penetrate Panther frontal armor at ranges under 200 meters, and that required a perfect hit on weak points. The Panther fired first. Its round punched through Lieutenant Anderson's Sherman, killing the entire crew instantly. Henson's training said to reverse, retreat, call in artillery. But the Panther was repositioning to target the remaining Shermans. Retreating meant exposing the thin rear armor. Advancing meant suicide, so Henson did neither. Morrison, hard left, get us behind that burning wreck. Chen, prepare smoke. Sullivan, Sherman, move right, get to those trees. The 2 Shermans split, using the burning tank as cover. The Panther, focused on Henson's movement, turned its turret left, which exposed its right side to Sullivan's Sherman. Fire! Henson shouted into the radio. Sullivan's gunner put an AP round into the Panther's side armor at 90 degrees, the weakest angle. The round penetrated and the Panther's ammunition detonated. It was the first time Henson had used what he'd later call the bait and flank tactic. One Sherman deliberately drew fire while others maneuvered for side shots. It worked because Shermans were faster and more maneuverable than Panthers, and German tank commanders often fixated on immediate threats. The problem was coordination. The tactic required perfect timing and communication. If radio contact failed, which happened frequently in the dense forest, tanks couldn't coordinate. Henson needed a backup signal system. That night, he and his crew liberated 3 smoke grenades from an infantry unit, 1 red, 1 green, 1 yellow. Henson developed a simple code. Red smoke from a Sherman meant enemy tank on my right. Green meant enemy tank on my left. Yellow meant I'm hit, withdraw. The system was crude, but it worked when radios failed. During a September 18th engagement, Henson's radio took shrapnel and died. He popped green smoke. Sullivan's Sherman immediately knew to circle left for a flank shot. They destroyed a Panzer IV without exchanging a single radio message. Part 4, December 19, 1944, the Ardennes. The Germans struck on December 16th with a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes, what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Henson's unit was rushed north to plug gaps in the line. The weather was brutal. Sub-zero temperatures, heavy snow, fog so thick visibility dropped to 20 meters. German panzer columns were pushing through American positions, trying to reach the Meuse River. Henson's platoon, now reinforced back to 5 Shermans, was holding a crossroads near Bastogne when a column of German armor appeared through the fog. The Americans could hear the tanks but couldn't see them clearly. "Chen, can you identify targets?" Henson asked. "Negative. Too much fog." Standard procedure was to hold fire until targets were identified. Firing blindly could hit friendly forces or waste ammunition, but the German column was advancing. In 5 minutes, they'd be at knife fighting range where numbers didn't matter. Henson made a decision. "All tanks, load white phosphorus. On my mark, fire into the fog at 50-meter intervals. Create a smoke screen behind their position." The 5 Shermans fired simultaneously. White phosphorus rounds detonated in the fog, creating massive screens of additional smoke behind the German column. The German tanks, already struggling with visibility, were now effectively blind. They stopped advancing, afraid of losing formation. which gave Henson's Shermans time to reposition. Using the sounds of German engines, they maneuvered to flank positions. When the fog briefly cleared, they had perfect side shots on 3 Panzerfaust and 2 StG-3 assault guns. The battle lasted 4 minutes. All 5 German vehicles were destroyed. No American losses. "Scrapper, that was either genius or insane," Chen said afterward. "Both," Henson replied. "That's why it worked." But the engagement revealed another problem. The Sherman's standard periscope sight performed poorly in low visibility conditions. The optics were designed for clear weather, and fog, smoke, or dusk made target acquisition nearly impossible. During a lull in fighting on December 22nd, Henson's crew found a destroyed Panther. Its main gun was ruined, but the optics were intact. German Zeiss lenses, significantly better than American equipment. "Can we adapt this?" Henson asked Chen, who'd been an optician's apprentice before the war. "Maybe. The mounting is different, but if we fabricate an adapter..." They spent 6 hours in a barn using salvaged metal and a welding torch, creating a custom mount that fitted the German optics into the Sherman's sight assembly. The result was ugly and violated about 15 technical manuals. It also worked beautifully. The Zeiss lenses provided clearer images in low light and at longer ranges. "This feels like cheating," Wright said. "War is cheating," Henson replied, "just cheating with rules." Part 5, March 24, 1945. The Rhine Crossing Operation Plunder, the Allied crossing of the Rhine, was the last major river obstacle before Germany's heartland. German defenders knew this and fought with desperate intensity. Henson's Sherman was part of the assault wave at Rees, where engineers had thrown a pontoon bridge across the river. German 82mm anti-tank guns covered the crossing points from elevated positions on the eastern bank. The problem was range. The 88s could hit targets at 2,000 meters with devastating accuracy. Sherman's 76mm guns were effective to about 1,000 meters under ideal conditions, and significantly less while firing from a moving, unstable pontoon bridge. "We're going to get massacred crossing that bridge," Morrison said, staring at the Rhine. He wasn't wrong. 3 Shermans had already been knocked out attempting the crossing. The 88s had perfect fields of fire. Henson studied the German positions through his modified sight. The Zeiss optics gave him a clear view at 1,200 meters, a range where Sherman crews normally couldn't see targets clearly enough to engage. "Chen, can you hit a target at 1,200 meters? From a stationary position? Maybe. From a moving bridge? No way. What if Morrison stops on the bridge? We'd be sitting ducks." "For how long? 10 seconds to sight and fire?" Chen considered. 8 seconds if Wright's fast with loading." "Right?" Henson asked. The loader was already checking ammunition. "I can do 8 seconds. The tactic violated every doctrine. Tanks weren't supposed to stop on exposed bridges. They were supposed to cross as fast as possible and seek cover. But doctrine assumed normal engagement ranges. With the modified optics, Henson could see targets that were theoretically beyond effective range, if he could fire accurately. "Morrison, when we get to the middle of the bridge, full stop. Chen, you'll have 1 shot before the 88s return fire. Make it count." They crossed at 600 hours. Halfway across the swaying pontoon bridge, Morrison hit the brakes. The Sherman lurched to a stop. Chen had the German 88 in his sight, a dug-in position 250 meters distant, visible only because of the excellent Zeiss optics. "Firing!" The 76mm gun roared. 8.3 seconds later, Henson counted, the German position exploded. Either the first shot hit or German ammunition cooked off from a near miss. "Go, go, go!" Henson shouted. Morrison floored the accelerator. The Sherman lurched forward just as a second German 88 fired from a different position. The round passed through the space they'd occupied 2 seconds earlier. They made it across. And more importantly, Other Shermans following them used the same tactic. Stop, fire accurately at long range using improvised optics, then move before return fire arrived. The crossing succeeded with lower casualties than anticipated. Intelligence officers later credited it to unexpectedly effective American long-range gunnery. They had no idea American tankers were using stolen German optics. Part 6, May 7, 1945, Czechoslovakia. The war in Europe ended the next day. Henson's Sherman, the same one he'd commanded since Normandy, now covered in improvised modifications and looking like a mobile junkyard, had survived 11 months of combat. The crew gathered around the tank for the last time. Morrison, Chen, Wright, and Sullivan had all made it. Not every crew in 3rd Armored could say that. "So what happens to all your modifications?" Chen asked. "Think the Army's gonna study them?" Henson shrugged. "Some of them, maybe. The spaced armor's already semi-official. The mirror trick's spreading. The tactics, those will probably just get written into training manuals without anyone remembering who figured them out first. Doesn't that bother you?" "No." The point wasn't credit. The point was not dying. Wright patted the Sherman's armored side. "This piece of junk saved our lives." "It's not a piece of junk," Henson said quietly. "The Sherman's a good tank. Not the best tank, but a good tank made better by guys who didn't want to die in a bad tank. You think the Germans had guys like you, making their tanks better?" Henson thought about the Panther he'd scavenged optics from, about the Tiger they'd destroyed in Hürtgen. German engineering was superior in many ways, but German tanks broke down constantly, consumed fuel at impossible rates, and couldn't be produced in sufficient numbers. "They had engineers," Henson said. "We had mechanics. Engineers build things. Mechanics make them work. War's won by the side that keeps working." Epilogue, Detroit, 1965. 20 years after the war, Henson stood in the Chrysler engineering bay with the young engineer, watching him weld the suspension reinforcement, using the simple pattern Henson had suggested. "How'd you think of this?" the engineer asked. "Same way I thought of everything in the war. I looked at what was failing, looked at what I had available, and made something that worked." "But you weren't an engineer." "No, I was a mechanic who didn't have time to die." Henson picked up the scrap metal again. "You know what I learned in France? The best solution isn't always the designed solution. Sometimes it's the scrap metal you find on the ground, and the welding torch you're not supposed to have." The engineer stepped back, looking at his work. The suspension reinforcement was crude but functional. "This'll hold?" "It'll hold." "Know how I know?" "How?" "Because in December 1944, I used the same principle to keep a Sherman running after its suspension mount cracked during the Battle of the Bulge. That tank carried me another 100 miles before we found a maintenance depot. If it worked on a frozen battlefield with German shells landing around me, it'll work in a Detroit factory." The engineer nodded slowly. "Mr. Henson, they tell stories about you. Tanker who made Shermans better with scraps and smoke and mirrors." "The mirrors were real," Henson said. "The rest was just not wanting to die. When your life depends on a machine, you either improve the machine or you die. We chose to improve." "And it worked?" Henson thought about Morrison, Chen, Wright, and Sullivan, all alive, all home. 3 of them with families now. Kids who'd never know their fathers had survived because a Detroit mechanic knew how to weld German scrap to American steel. "We're here, aren't we?" Henson said. "That's how you know it worked."